Thank you, Bruce. Wow, this morning has just been a whole reflection on the journey of the last year, from thinking back to where we were a year ago. We gathered with so many of you who are logging in now in Sacramento in person, to meeting with Treasurer Ma in Los Angeles at the LGBT Elder Center with the Commission on Aging event, to aligning with Maria Shriver and the Alzheimer's Task Force at a community roundtable in Fresno, among others across the state, to, of course, dozens and dozens of meetings and webinars and community roundtables with so many of you. Thank you to Bruce, the SCAN Foundation, and all of you who have been part of this journey. You know, we thought we'd be at a different place today. Those of you who remember your executive order from the governor calling for the master plan for aging, October 1st was the due date. That was our plan, that we would be here in person today in Sacramento, fully plotting and planning implementation. Well, as we all know, this has been a challenging year that has changed our timing, but has not changed our resolve and our commitment. That, if anything, is more than ever. As evidenced by the 800 plus recommendations that have come in. And I am so excited about the conversation today where even more reflections will come in. The administration is taking that all to heart. Thank you to those of you who've been briefing our cabinet members in past days and weeks. And we are on track for a December announcement of the California 10-year master plan for aging in alignment with the Alzheimer's Task Force. And then the real work will begin. But throughout, we have been committed to making sure that this is a plan by and for people who are aging, which is all of us, but particularly people who are already older, people with disabilities, family, friends, loved ones in the broadest sense, and caregivers and leaders in the field. And we are very lucky to have a three-part conversation this morning to continue hearing from all those voices, to center our work on the voices of Californians. First, we have just the most special way to start this day is to check in with our panelists from last year and hear about their last year. How have they stayed healthy, stayed safe, stayed connected, navigated a time of political upheaval, a time of economic challenge, a time of isolation and reconnection? We're so lucky to have those stories brought to us here. And so I'd like to turn it over to let the cameras roll.
In 2019, we embarked on a journey to uncover what aging In 2019, we embarked on a journey to uncover what aging looks like for Californians and how we might ensure that all Californians can age in place with dignity. We spent several months learning from older adults, people with disabilities, and those who support them. This past summer, we followed up with several of those individuals to see how their lives have changed since then. There were reasons to celebrate, including many for Karen Anderson and Gwen Bouzet, who are deeply involved with Lavender Seniors, supporting LGBTQ older adults.
We had our 25th anniversary for Lavender Seniors, at our 29th anniversary for Karen and I, sharing our lives together.
Amongst life celebrations, some also experienced unforeseen disasters in their communities, including a spree of intense earthquakes centered in Ridgecrest, home of John and Norba Abbott. Some older adults were in unstable housing conditions, but have since been able to move into more secure housing, including Carmen Guerreta, a resident of Fremont. Jerome McIntosh, an older adult in Oakland, has a similar fortune. After spending years at St. Mary's Center in transitional housing and sending in hundreds of housing applications, one was accepted.
I have my own studio apartment now, and that's a really big deal. So I have my own finally, and now I have a place for my grandson. I have a grandson; he's 3 years old. Now he can come over and run around and mess up my house. I'm enjoying it a lot.
Some older adults have made even larger moves, changing cities and downsizing homes to be closer to loved ones as they continue to age, including Kathleen Louis, who relocated from Orange County to San Diego.
I have friends, they're fabulous people. But at the end of the day, everybody goes home to their own lifestyle, their own families, their own lives. And it was at that time that I started to think, okay, maybe this is the time, because I don't have relatives near me. I think we need to be closer together. They can help me, I can help them. I'm happy to be closer to family, and I think for me, it makes me feel a little bit more secure and happy. There's something to do with family somewhere every day.
We also checked in with April Wick, who is on the front line providing services to older adults and people with disabilities.
I live here in Sacramento with my husband, Paul, and our dog, Sammy, and I am the executive director of Resources for Independent Living, which is a intersectional social justice organization for people with disabilities and older adults here in Sacramento, and we serve Sacramento and Yolo counties.
These individuals' realities, like everyone's, changed dramatically with the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, a virus that inordinately affects older adults and people with pre-existing conditions.
Certainly, it was worrisome. We didn't know that much. I started making masks as well, handing them out to my friends.
Stay-at-home stuff, that's very unusual for either one of us. And otherwise than that, it's restricted our movements, it's needless to say. And it's very unusual to not be out in the community and not be social.
Many identity factors, such as race, gender, sexual orientation, economic status, and ability, deeply affect someone's experience of aging. And they also have a dramatic impact on how the pandemic is felt firsthand.
So people with disabilities, particularly people with disabilities that are lower income and who are members of minority groups, are disproportionately impacted by COVID for a lot of different reasons. And we definitely saw that play out. Like our clients were already on, the cusp of losing housing or losing their income or stability. But COVID highlighted those disparities and also made them worse.
Our people had the underlying concern that perhaps the neglect that they're experiencing may be LGBT related. So in addition to the conditions that everyone is concerned with, there's a thing that I'm being neglected in addition to being isolated.
The pandemic also exposed the fragility in our systems and communities, which many of the people we spoke with have felt firsthand over the course of their lives and are even more aware of right now. Some are able to live in places that make getting through these tough times a bit easier, while those who were struggling with housing before are even more vulnerable during the pandemic.
This is a walking neighborhood. All the seniors here are walkers, morning and late at night. So they're all walking, they're all wearing masks, they're all talking to me, they're welcoming me to the neighborhood, very friendly, very, very nice.
I know a couple of people that still living on the street. The only thing they tell me is the only thing they could do was adjust to what the situation was, and deal with it with what they had.
Social isolation is also a challenge that many older adults and people with disabilities face, and stay-at-home and social distancing orders, while necessary, have severed the connections people have to critical social and emotional supports.
And then there are some of our people that have had so much anxiety around this isolation that they're feeling suicidal. I haven't got out of this room in 3 months now, and I need help, but my volunteer can't come and help me. No one wants to touch me or see me, So some of them, the ones that can get to us through Zoom, it's generally on like an iPad or something that they have. They have let us know that they are in a lot of crises and a lot of anxiety around this experience.
For the past few years, John has been a part of a local group for veterans with PTSD. They met regularly to provide each other mutual support, but that has been disrupted.
Yep, I miss it, and the guys miss it to the fact that I just had a couple of people I talked with early this week said, let's get together at my house. Really, really miss it, really need it.
We also heard about the ways in which people are getting their basic needs met. Most have had to find workarounds, whether it be coordinating food and medication pickup and delivery or accessing healthcare services.
Our medicine comes in the mail 3 months worth at a time. Our food, look online, and it comes in, and they leave it on the porch. And then I go out with my gloves and my wipes, take everything out the bag, wipe it off, put it in the house.
My disability requires me to have a lot of durable medical equipment delivered once a month. And so for a while I was kind of freaked out about being able to access all the things that I would need to live independently. And so I had to get creative about when I had to do my ordering. And for a while I was out of some things I needed. And I didn't have them. And so I had to use something else, and it was really scary.
Carmen lives alone and recently lost her vision, making it even more difficult to manage her needs.
Doctor prescribed some medicine, and they said that my insurance was not approving that. So I tried to call them to find out what was going on, but they told me that they had everything send it to me to the computer to read it. I said, I cannot see. I said, okay, I'm sorry, but somebody has to help me. Boom, they hung up.
In these times, technology can be a powerful tool for maintaining connections and getting needs met. However, as we just heard, not everyone can access it or feels comfortable with it.
The pandemic has made it double necessary. It's the only way to communicate. With seniors, it becomes a real problem. They're not comfortable with media, may not have a computer, and if they do have a computer, it's very cumbersome for them to figure out how to do a Zoom, and very frustrating.
Just the other day, got a few calls from people who were like, well, how am I supposed to come to a Zoom class if I don't have Wi-Fi? So the systemic issue is, like, let's say for telehealth, they don't have access to a computer where they could show the doctor what's going on with them. Or maybe they need an advocate to sit with them. And I know sometimes some of the telehealth places will say, only you can be here, and these are the rules of how you need to show up to this day. And that doesn't always, work for people with disabilities.
In the midst of this chaos and uncertainty, older adults and people with disabilities have had to rely on their resiliency and strength in the face of numerous challenges.
We go in our backyard. I have a stationary bike out there, and I ride that, and I walk around in my backyard. But I'm used to going out. I'm used to going and visiting people. I'm used to communicating with people. I mean, getting a hug. All of that is really important to our well-being, and it has been taken away from us.
I read. I've joined Kindle Unlimited, and I think I've read about 60 books.
Well, the good thing is, all the emeritus classes, they're online. There's all Zoom. They're on Canvas. So it's really nice because you can do it at home. They do have a balance class, a balance and mobility class, and then chair exercises, an investment class. I hope everybody has a chance to do stuff like that, because that's really helpful.
Despite their own struggles, many are also finding ways to support others during this tough time.
I mean, I've helped others. I've personally helped them by giving them a little food here and there, or something they might need, or sometime I will go to the store. A couple of people that I know that can't get out, I'll get them something.
What we've been doing is phone banking. We've been calling and trying to get to as many people every day as we can. We have over 1,000 people on our list, and we try to get to as many people every day.
Yeah, we all stay in touch by way of text, occasional phone call, but we like to text just to know that still brothers.
In addition to providing direct support, they're also advocating for themselves and others.
So I called and I said, I went into Target. Nobody was wearing masks. I didn't feel safe. I think it would be very wise for your public health department to make a statement saying you need masks or you need hand sanitation. So that was all that I could do. But I felt at least I was trying to do something, to make people aware.
It was very scary. There were no way to go shopping. And I came back home. And I started calling the supermarket. Can you listen? Please put hours for seniors. They're going to kill us. Help us. And one laughed, but the other ones, they just hung up on me. And the next day, I saw the first thing when I turned on the TV, I saw that there were senior hours. I felt so happy.
Through the turbulence, many older adults and people with disabilities are continuing to maintain a positive outlook and drawing on their own inner strength and loved ones to help them through.
Well, the things are going to be better. I have learned so much from this that I'm going to be a lot stronger. I want to have more security in myself. I want to be stronger. I hope whatever happened this time, it's going to be like a lesson for everybody.
I think we have to be hopeful. We have a great number of seniors with a range of backgrounds, a range of needs. And if people can know about them and be aware of them, then we can help them.
While this positive outlook is a necessity in the current moment, for some, it's simply not sustainable or enough. Furthermore, the pandemic has highlighted the interconnectedness of people and problems and underscores the need for systemic change.
And I was so excited about the governor's master plan that would address, well, at least shed a light on all of this. And then the pandemic hit.
I'm hoping that this is really an invitation to look at, what are the disparities in health and food access and, displacement with affordable, accessible housing. We're seeing that really highlighted now because of COVID. And we have an invitation to double down and really push for the kind of world that we want to live in. I think we're realizing how interdependent on each other we are. We actually could have the momentum to make the changes that are needed.
We have the chance right now to make sure that all Californians emerge from this crisis stronger than ever. Older adults and people with disabilities across the state need a master plan for aging that takes a systemic and equitable approach to honor their realities and uplift their quality of life. Together, let's continue to advocate for a plan that ensures all Californians can lead full and dignified lives.
Impossible to follow, and I won't even try, except to know that we're going to continue the conversation right now with three of our strongest and most collaborative and creative leaders in California who will take us to the next step to do what Karen and Gwen and April all called us to do, which is double down. With that, I want to let you know that we're going to be very soon opening the conversation to you. So you will start to see the text number where you can text your questions in the banner, 916-678-1290. So be thinking about your questions and please send them in. But let's do this, open the conversation to three of our leaders here with us today. Karishma Ali, who is on the team that both brought the panel together last year and brought us up to date with that powerful, powerful film. Gillard and Eli Gillardin from the Marin Independent Living Center, where he is the CEO, as well as a true pioneer in the Aging Disability Resource Connections we'll hear about. And Edie Yao, who's been a partner with us from the Alzheimer's Association on caregiving, and so much more. So with that, Karishma, can you start us off? And then we'll go to Eli and Edie.
Absolutely. Thank you, Director Wade. And I just want to start by saying how lucky I feel to have this insider view, having the opportunity to work on the video. And I know our team was extremely grateful to have had the opportunity to do this the first time around last year when we had a chance to meet with the older adults and put the panel together, and then to go back again this year and build on those relationships. And the first thing that I'll just say is that for those that were able to join the forum last year and hear from the videos and the panel, you'll notice that what we heard is that the needs haven't changed. The overarching issues are quite the same as when we met with them last year with the older adults and their care teams. It's about housing and getting their basic needs met and social isolation. So the issues are all the same, except now they're even more exacerbated, and there's this additional component of having to maintain physical distance, which really makes everything just so much more difficult in terms of providing service, in terms of receiving service, caring for yourself and caring for others. But I will say the one thing that really struck our team as we were putting this video together and hearing from these older adults is their resiliency, which is incredibly remarkable. And even with so much turbulence, most of them were thinking about how they can positively contribute to society, how they can be of service to other individuals, whether it's other older adults or family members or friends or whomever. So that was really striking for us and very inspiring to just hear that even in kind of the most dire moments, these individuals are thinking about how they can be a part of the society. And I'll just add that our design studio's philosophy is really about elevating voices of those that are typically unheard and those that are impacted the most by policies and by programs and services and whatever we may be designing. And that's really the joy of our work. But at the same time, we are big advocates of that learning happening in service of action and in service of change. So I'm really hopeful that hearing from these voices will actually lead to change and be a springboard for the momentum that can create that change.
Great. Eli, your thoughts?
Awesome. First of all, Karishma and the whole team that put together that video, phenomenal job. I think it really highlights both the resiliency as well as the opportunity ahead of us. And reflecting on the video, I'm going to reference Ian Morrison's book, The Second Curve. So there's two curves of innovation. It's the curve that we're currently on as organizations and communities. And then there's the futurist curve, the curve that we're going towards. And then I would say there's the third curve, which is the COVID curve, which is acceleration. For all the reasons that were highlighted in the video, food insecurity, social isolation. Gwen talked about the impact of social distancing on mental health, the absolute need for support for a caregiver infrastructure. And as many of us as service providers who have been responding over the last 8 months, the need has accelerated for more comprehensive long-term services and supports, more collaboration between public and private sector, between healthcare and the nonprofit community. And I think a lot of innovative work and exciting efforts have been accomplished in a short period of time. But how do we sustain and build upon that? We see models, whether it's the ADRC network, whether it's the master plan and some of the recommendations like building a long-term services and support infrastructure through financing. And the opportunity I think we have, especially with what COVID has highlighted in congregate living and the impact that our older adults and people with disabilities who are in restricted environments face, is that we have to, it's not even a choice, we have to invest more greatly in our long-term service and supports infrastructure. And we need the leadership, and we do have that certainly with the master plan with Director Wade and others, but we need leadership across the board to just accelerate this to a level that we have not seen in our state or our country. And I just look forward to being a part of that. The other element that I just want to tease out and kind of thinking about is climate change. We've seen the impact, in addition to social distancing, wildfires, smoke, evacuation. We certainly have seen that in Marin County in supporting our older adults and people with disabilities, maintaining safely, breathing, having access to assistive technology, power and backup batteries. And how do we integrate climate change and the emerging need for LTSS with a lens of climate change? And then I'll finally end with, I think there's an opportunity to elevate our caregiver workforce. We've seen caregivers and the response, the absolute selflessness of caregivers going into, congregate living facilities, going into in-home care. We're talking about a population that is predominantly women of color, immigrant, and at wages under $20 an hour, in most places $15 an hour. How do we elevate the caregiver workforce? How do we create a career ladder? How do we invest in professional development and equity for our caregiver workforce so that they can support our older adults and people with disabilities in continuing to shelter in place and continuing to live in the community so that we are not moving more folks into congregate living?
Wow, that was a lot packed in. Edie, your thoughts?
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for having me on, and Karishma, nice work on the film. The comment that struck me the most of the panelists was Carmen's, really. I never thought I would get old. And I think we hear that a lot in different ways. I never thought I would get old, or the fact that I didn't really plan for this. She said, I took care of everyone else. I worked hard. She believed, like so many of us that are led to believe, I'm going to retire into the sunset. I'll travel, I'll live the good life. And then in the blink of an eye, I got old. And I think about that one line from, I don't know if you're a fan of Talking Heads, but from Once in a Lifetime. And you may ask yourself, well, how did I get here? And the problem with this mythical dream that so many people are led to believe about, we're going to retire, I'm going to play golf and is with what money, how much, and for how long, and with no real foresight or anticipation of natural disasters, the climate change that we're facing, or deadly viruses that have upended our lives. And so then we saw a year later, there's been a lot of movement and a lot of real creative work on each individual's part to make change for the better. But it shouldn't have to be so hard for every individual. I work for the Alzheimer's Association, and so I think a lot about Alzheimer's disease, and it's the third leading cause of death in California. And we know there are 700,000 people with Alzheimer's, and there are 1.6 million caregivers in California. And no one expects to have Alzheimer's. They don't plan to be a caregiver in that regard, and they don't know how long it's going to take. And so it's interesting that this is the phase of life where it's like a road trip, and you can do the best planning you can, but things happen. And this is why I think there's a real need for this master plan for aging, is to really have some kind of an infrastructure and support for people. Individuals are doing the best they can with what they have, but things happen. And I don't think we've really planned for this. So as a state, it's exciting to think about how can we create more of a solid infrastructure for when things are upended for people's lives. And I think that having a master plan for aging, you heard what the panelists said. They were hopeful and they were excited about this because it really speaks to the fact that we matter. As aging adults, we still matter, and that we've contributed to society, and there's got to be some way that that values that, and that we're still, no matter what age, 40, 50, 60, 70, 90, we're still contributing to society. And there's got to be a way to value that and to harness the strength, but to provide that network of support for when things happen. So I'll just stop there. I think those are my sort of comments from watching the film.
Thank you, Edie. And I too was struck, the theme of this conference is about the journey of aging. And of course, the master plan itself is aiming to set out a roadmap. And one of the things that was so powerful about the stories is how the journey continues. I was struck by how many people moved, right? We have this myth in our culture of age in place. Well, aging is changing and people are moving, whether by choice, new housing opportunity in Oakland, or to be closer to family in San Diego, or because of disasters in Ridgecrest, maybe not a move, but a modification. But just housing changes were throughout that, which may be a surprise to people, but I think actually is part of the new norm that we need to plan for, is the journey of aging. We are going to open to questions in just a second, but I thought one of the things that was also so striking by the film, Karishma, is that it wasn't so often in aging services, I find we're talking about older people as recipients, as passive, as objects of the story. But the film really centered older adults as the subjects, as activists, as volunteers, as learners, as caregivers, as check-in callers. And so I'm wondering if each of you could maybe share something that is giving you kind of hope or feeling of resilience in these, just not, and again, I'm thinking of Rigo Saborio, it's from St. Barnabas Services in Los Angeles, who is to say, not to minimize in any way the suffering that's happening right now. The basic needs for food, for hugs, for medicine, for purpose, but that people are resilient. And so I'm wondering if you could share what's giving you hope or what's giving you resilience, either from the film that struck you or in your own work. Eli, I'll start with you.
So many examples. And, I think one, the innate resiliency in older adults and people with disabilities, their lived experience, their overcoming of barriers, self-advocating, sense of pride and self is in itself hopeful. On a local level, what we're seeing in our community, as well as what we've seen in other communities, is the just standing up and acceleration of critical programs, whether it's food distribution and building networks upon Meals on Wheels and food banks, having multiple agencies in the public sector come together and put together an expanded food program for older adults and people with disabilities who were not able and have not been able to access the grocery store as well as warm meals. Another example is just disaster resilience and the acceleration that independent living centers have taken to stand up a program to support folks when public safety power shutoffs or rolling blackouts have occurred. And so, I think that innate resiliency in people who have overcome and addressed barriers, while not totally prepared us for COVID, that gives me hope.
How about you, Karishma?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I feel like I actually oscillate between two different feelings when it comes to resiliency, because on the one hand, it's incredibly inspiring. And on the other hand, I think there's also a danger in it, because a lot of the older adults we talked to, they felt neglected by the system. The system was not serving them. And so the resiliency really comes from a place of, powering through and doing for themselves what others are not able to do for them. So it really comes out of a need, because what is the alternative here, to just, I think Carmen even said, and maybe it didn't make it in the video, and she said, I don't want to just sit and cry about my fate. And a couple other things that didn't come up. I mean, she was homeless in her 70s and, having to travel from home to home, not out of desire, but because she needed to find affordable housing. And then, to lose her vision and having to navigate the insurance system while she can't see and during COVID. And So these things, as much as inspiring as they are, because they are able to find that internal support within themselves, I think that this is also a wake-up call that the system has not been successful in serving these individuals. So that's what's driving this. But I think, yes, I certainly think that there are a lot of things to celebrate here. I think hearing from Karen and Gwen that have 1,000 people on their phone banking list, and they said that they're on the phone for hours every single day, just reaching out to people and making sure that they know that somebody's there for them. Often these people are alone in nursing homes or are trapped in their homes and don't have anybody that can come and be with them. And so just hearing those stories really, I mean, warms your heart. But at the same time, I wish it didn't have to be so extreme.
Mm-hmm. How about you, Edie?
What gives me hope? Is that
Yes.
the question? Well, you saw, I mean, all the panelists, and we've seen in even today when I look at, the people around me and the people that we serve, and people have found a way. Resiliency is a mechanism of survival. I mean, people didn't get to where they are without having some of that strength from their lived experiences. And I think that's really important. I also think that one of the things we've seen through the pandemic is creativity. I mean, the fact that we're doing this forum virtually, and I think we've also seen that there are ways for us to touch people in different, through this virtual way that we never anticipated. I mean, just from some of our programs that we've done to reach Spanish-speaking individuals around Alzheimer's, we've seen our ability to go internationally that we never thought we would be able to do. I mean, the possibilities start to really open up in that sense. And the fact that we're starting to see, in some ways, neighbors reaching out to one another, and that social isolation piece that I think is highlighted from the video, that's a piece that I think about a lot, is the social isolation and the loneliness that has really emerged as a public health concern. And that human connection is so vital to our survival. And that's something that each of us can touch on. And it can be built into systems, but I think that's a really important piece that has become this thread. And going back to the phone banking, I mean, Karen Anderson, I think John talked about, using the phone and talking to one another. It's the traditional phone tree. I think there is a lot of hope, and we have to have hope, as one of the panelists had said, Kathleen had said.
Thank you all for that. We are now going to open up the conversation with that spirit of hope and creativity and community, because our questions coming in are about the challenges that we need to solve. So there are many. I'm going to try to match a challenge to each of you and let you have at it. And then we can open it up for some more cross conversation as well. But one of the first challenges that's coming in, and I'll ask you, Karishma, to speak to it, is as well, we're hearing that community is part of the solution, but there is still so much othering. There is still so much ageism, racism, LGBTQ prejudice. Of course, racism is rampant at this moment in our history. So how do we bridge this other in order to become the California for all ages, to have those communities that can power transformation? How do you deal with other right now?
Yeah, I think it's really about changing the mindset of how aging is viewed. So one of our recommendations that came out of this work was to really view aging as a universal experience and a celebratory process. Right now, it's viewed as an affliction, that I don't want to think about, or something that I won't have to deal with for a very long time. So let me not think about it. But when people start to view it as something that is a process that we are all going to have to manage at some point, I think we'll start to take some of these issues more seriously. And just personally being from a culture that really reveres older adults and views them as an essential part of society, I think it really changes how we think about caretaking and how we even approach this idea of aging. And I think just continuing to take a more human-centered approach, learning and hearing from older adults and their care teams and including them in the process of change, and not just the older adults that are most easily accessible, but particularly those that amongst them are the most vulnerable of this population. So that includes Black and Brown older adults, LGBTQ older adults, people with disabilities, people that may not speak English, etc. And then also considering what intersectionalities we need to be mindful of. So recognizing the nuances between the needs of a queer Black older adult versus a white cisgender older adult. The needs are not the same. So really approaching it in a universal way, but then being very targeted in the strategies and making sure that we are targeting them to the specific groups that we are doing this work for.
Thank you. Another challenge we're hearing a lot about is people who are in residential settings, and both the challenge of the COVID outbreaks that are happening there and also the prolonged separation from loved ones with the policies that have been in place on visiting, on ombuds, et cetera. Edie, I don't know if you can talk about that from your work with the Alzheimer's Association. We know a significant number of people who are in residential facilities have some form of dementia. So if you could just speak to that challenge of residential living and health and isolation and well-being there.
Yeah, that has certainly been a challenge, and certainly through our public policy and advocacy work, we've been advocating for a number of policy changes to make sure that, you know, long-term care settings have the PPEs necessary, and that they're informing families when someone is diagnosed with COVID, and making sure all those protections are in place, but also making sure that ombudsmen can go in, because families are really struggling with not being able to communicate with their loved ones, and not knowing whether they're safe or okay or how they're doing. Individuals in these settings have gone months without communication with their family members. So it's a really important issue, and especially for people with dementia who really may not understand what is going on, and particularly if I think about those who English is not their first language too, how even more exacerbated that is and how confusing it can be. So definitely putting in place priorities for making sure families can communicate with them.
Thank you. And Eli, several questions coming in around home and community-based services. I'll just tee up two for you. One is caregivers themselves, how caregivers can stay healthy and stay on the job. We know there's been challenges for this availability of caregivers. And this, of course, is a longer-term trend, but also right now. And then interruptions in services, senior centers closing, meal routes, losing volunteers. Just our system has really been given the ultimate stress test. And so what are your thoughts? You spoke this a little bit in terms of some of the creativity and innovation you're seeing in Marin, but what else would you say?
Yeah, so many levels to this. I think one opportunity and something we're looking at both in our community as well as we're seeing in others is bridging the digital divide for caregivers and recipients. So distributing Chromebooks, just as the schools are doing for virtual learning, distributing Chromebooks to caregivers and consumers so they can fill out their IHSS electronic timesheets, providing some training. And a lot of that is happening both at the independent living centers as well as our public libraries. But really recognizing that, you know, bridging the digital divide, it's a service issue, and it also addresses some of the elements of social isolation. So providing peer support and mentoring and advocacy, town halls or peer connections through Zoom and other platforms, really bringing people's tech, accelerating people's tech knowledge in a very short time frame. I think we have seen a lot of those practices coming into place during COVID. And then, you know, the other side of best practices that I think about is just going back to that deep collaboration We have several weekly stakeholder calls, whether it's working on food distribution, looking at public charge and the impact of some of these national policies on our immigrant community, and how we access public benefits. And again, going back to the caregiver equity issue, what can we do as communities to raise the living wage and the resources for caregivers, as well as childcare, and health benefits. There are so many layers of advocacy that we can take on this. And, I think the exciting opportunity with the master plan, and now the master plan with the COVID lens, is to accelerate some of these issues.
Thank you very much. I'm just smiled at your childcare comment, because I think you and I have both been on calls with our children running in the background. So it is very real, very real. I also just want to say, you mentioned collaboration, and we've talked about aging and disability. We've talked about public and private, state and local. I would be remiss if I didn't lift up the federal partnership that is powering so much of this, the additional federal funding for meals, the additional federal funding in the CARES Act that is paying for devices, that is allowing virtual care, adult day health centers to be able to do hybrid services, ombud services, you name it. The federal partnership is absolutely essential in responding to a national and global crisis of this scale. So we are rounding the bend. I just want to do a speed round and ask if any of you have a final thought. I'm so glad we talked about resilience. We talked about the opportunity for digital divide. We talked about the need for, as April said, intersectionality and justice. What else do we need to say to wrap this up? Karishma, speed round.
I will just advocate again for being very human-centered, or person-centered, as the SCAN Foundation calls it, and just always keeping the voices of older adults at the forefront of any decisions that are made and changes that are made.
Edie, how about you?
Yeah, I think a similar thought that while we're highlighting these voices, that when we talk about equity, it really needs to be that we're including the voices of those that we want to help solve for. The solutions that are going to come out need to make sure that they work for the people that we're trying to care for. And so making sure they have a seat at the table from design to execution, right? Not just at one stage, but from the very get-go and all throughout.
And Eli Delardon, last word.
Big, bold leadership from community organizing at the grassroots level to our leaders in Sacramento. Just with storm clouds on the horizon, we know the challenges ahead of us, but this is an opportunity to really lean in to the changes that need to happen in our state, and set up our state and frankly lead for the country in how to support our aging and disability populations.
It cannot be said better than that. So I will let that truly be the last word. Thank you so much to our panelists. Thank you most of all to the stars of our film and our panel from last year. And I will, in the spirit of big and bold and brave leadership, hand it back to our host today, Bruce Chernoff, CEO of SCAN Foundation. Thank you all.
Wow, Kim, thank you for a great, great panel. I'm really struck by something you said at the very beginning about, subject, not object. We are the subjects of all of our lives, and not the objects of it. And we need to build programs that honor and reflect that. If we do that, we're going to be building the world that we all want. And I think that should be our goal. The other thing I really take from this excellent, excellent panel is, in these difficult times, we need to be bold. We need to build the world we want. This is not a time for little tiny transformational changes around the edges. The state faces plenty of problems, but it also creates a great set of opportunities really for us to move forward. Kim, personally, I want to thank you again for all your leadership. I want to make sure we thank our wonderful morning plenary session speakers, and really thank all the folks who participated in our video to give us an update on where they are.